Uganda'S forests are disappearing at an alarming rate, but behind every lost tree lies a much bigger story, one of governance, accountability, climate justice, poverty, refugees, and the struggle for survival. A new set of policy briefs released by the Advocate Coalition for Development and Environment, ACODE, paints a troubling picture from West Nile and Karamoja. The research reveals weak forest governance systems, inadequate benefit sharing arrangements, growing climate vulnerabilities, and increasing pressure on some of Uganda's most important forest landscape. In West Nile, refugee settlements, commercial charcoal production, illegal logging, and weak enforcement continue to strain forests such as Zoka and Kagoro. In Karamoja, drought, poverty, wildfires, overgrazing, and competition for scarce resources are accelerating degradation. But beyond the statistics lies a critical question. Are Uganda's current forest governance systems working for both people and nature? Today, we sit down with the Deputy Executive Director of ACODE, Onesmus Mugyenyi, to unpack what the findings mean for communities, policymakers, conservation agencies, and the future of Uganda's climate resilience.
Onesmus Mugyenyi, Deputy Executive Director, ACODE. Thank you for allowing to talk to us. Mr. Mugyenyi, for someone who has not read the policy briefs, what exactly did ACODE find in West Nile and Karamoja?
West Nile and Karamoja, basically we're looking at issues of natural resource governance and climate justice. And what we found is that there is increasing degradation of the forest resources both in Karamoja and West Nile. While it is not surprising because reports have been indicating that forests are declining, but what we found that is a little bit fascinating is the participation of the citizens, what I can call inclusive conservation is one of the missing links. That citizens are divorced, citizens are not participating in the conservation of these forest resources because they have less understanding. They cannot easily link their livelihoods with these forest resources, and therefore their involvement is very limited. And we found that a little bit unique, that we've had the laws, we've had the policies over the years, awareness has been created, climate change issues have been around for some time, but we found that actually there is still limited inclusivity in the conservation of forest resources in the two regions. And one of the issues that emerged is that the benefit sharing, when you have a forest resource, the benefits that are rising from those resources are not shared in an equitable manner. In other words, the communities do not see how they are benefiting from these forest resources. There are certain benefits that are indirect, very indirect, like climate modification is very important. Everybody benefits from this resource. But for them as communities that live with this resource, that live around this resource, they expect to see benefits other than those indirect benefits that everybody, whether you live in that area or not, are benefiting from these forest resources.
Your report talks about climate justice. What does climate justice mean in simple language for a farmer, pastoralist, refugee, or community member?
Climate justice has a number of dimensions, but it is a phrase that is picked from environmental justice. Because, environment was here before climate change, became very prominent. And environmental justice was about those that are heavily affected by the impacts of degradation, when you are doing the interventions, are they taken into consideration? And when we come to climate change, you realize that climate change is affecting, first of all, climate change, the drivers of climate change are largely from, for example, companies, from activities of big multinational companies. And those who suffer the impacts of climate change, or those that are most vulnerable, contribute little to the climate shocks or the climate changes that are happening. And when you are addressing the aspects of climate change, you find that you are not even focusing on these most affected that are even contributing little and have limited ability to adapt or to do anything to become more resilient. And therefore, climate justice comes in to focus on these vulnerable communities and groups. And it looks at these contribute less to the shocks. So those who are contributing more to these shocks should be able to address these concerns. And the focus should be on these communities or these vulnerable groups because they don't have the capacity to do any adjustment. So then climate justice is about that. When you are looking at resource allocation, when you are looking at climate change interventions, are they looking at the most vulnerable who contribute little to these climate changes?
Why should an ordinary Ugandan who lives far from these forests care about what is happening in West Nile and Karamoja?
These resources that we talk about in Karamoja, forest resources in Karamoja and in West Nile, do not necessarily benefit the people that live around them. Because their roles, for example, in climate modification, in absorbing the carbon dioxide and then releasing fresh air and then be able to stabilize climate, is enjoyed by many people that live far off from these resources. And therefore, whether you live in Karamoja, whether you live in central Uganda, whether you live anywhere in any part of this country, you should be concerned when forest resources in Karamoja or forest resources in West Nile are being degraded. Because when drought hits, it is not going to affect only Karamoja or West Nile. It will also affect other areas. Because when climate is modified, it is not limited to one geographical area.
Your report really repeatedly talks about governance failures. Who exactly is failing our forests? Government institutions, local leaders, communities, or all of them? Who's failing our forests?
It's a failure of many actors. And remember, governance is a big terminology, but if you want to understand it, is to unpack it. And this is about transparency and accountability in the way these natural resources or these forests are being governed. It is about participation of citizens in the management of these resources. It is about the efficiency and effectiveness of the policies and laws in managing these resources. So why I say that actually it is a failure of many actors is that you have government that is supposed to put in place policies, laws, regulations, and create awareness about these regulations and enforce these regulations. Then you don't have enough budget allocations for the systems to operate. So there is failure on part of government because the laws, the policies are not being enforced. There is also failure on part of citizens because the citizens are supposed to hold government accountable. But when they don't have the information, then the citizens are not able to do their role of actually holding government accountable. So therefore, they also fail in their role as citizens because they don't have the necessary information on the basis of which to hold government accountable. We have, for example, civil society organizations that are creating awareness, but their interventions are very limited because they come in and go. So it is a government that can have a sustainable program of creating awareness, of involving citizens in the governance of these resources. But when you depend on civil society organizations that get just projects come in and go out, they are not able to do this work in a very sustainable manner. But we have the biggest challenge in this country, which is called corruption. And this corruption is not resident in one institution. Because when courts of law are not able to do their job, then you are not able to get justice in the court system. When the duty bearers, for example, the government, the law enforcement officers are corrupt, they are not able to enforce the law. When the politicians or the policy makers who are supposed to do certain policies and make sure that these policies are implemented are involved in corruption, then they are not able to do their work. So that's how corruption makes systems fail. And then you find that even those who are supposed to implement are not able to implement because you cannot implement alone. That's why we have all these institutions, and these institutions are supposed to check each other. You have the executive that is able to make the policies. You have parliament that is able to translate the policies into laws. You have the judiciary that is able to administer justice. So if any of those institutions is not doing its job, it affects the way other institutions also do their work.
From your findings and your reports, the report suggests communities are often promised benefits but receive very little in return. Has conservation become a bad business deal for local people, especially in West Nile and Karamoja?
Yeah, modern conservation requires that citizens participate in conservation because they have lived with nature over the years and therefore they need to participate. But for them to be able to participate, they need to see the benefits. What do they benefit by participating in the conservation? And these benefits may range from resources, revenue. They may range from other advantages that come with this resource. But there is limited sharing of these benefits. For example, in the forestry sector, the aspect of revenue sharing is not there. If you look at, for example, in other conservation areas, like areas that are managed by Uganda Wildlife Authority, the communities near those protected areas at least are sharing some bit of revenue. So it becomes an incentive for these communities to get involved in the conservation because they see some revenue coming in. And therefore, when they see somebody doing encroachment, they are able to report because they know that they are getting some revenue. In the forestry sector, there is no revenue that is being shared. And we think it is possible to have revenue being shared. We now have a revenue that is coming in terms of, for example, carbon trading. So if it is a forest resource and you've entered into an arrangement where revenue is coming in through carbon trading, why not have a share of that with the communities? But there are also other benefits that could come to communities by getting involved in conservation, including, harvesting some products. So the arrangements that the agencies that are managing the forest resources and the communities is a little bit imbalanced. And we think that we can balance it by increasing the benefits that come to the communities so that the communities see an incentive of being involved in conserving these forest resources.
When you read your report, you get to understand that many community members told your researchers that illegal activities such as charcoal burning often pay more than legal conservation initiatives. For example, one wouldn't go for beehives, yet there's charcoal production, there's illegal logging that gives them quick money. What do you think about that? And do you think these models, conservation models, are not realistic and are not benefiting these people? Which explains why they go for these illegal activities.
Very, very true. Because charcoal burning is largely, and especially illegal one, is just exploitative. You go in and harvest timber, burn charcoal, and benefit from it when you've not actually done the investment. The other aspects, for example, apiary, you need to get the hives, you need to invest in time, you need to do some bit of management for you to get the benefits. So when illegal logging happens, that one brings immediate benefits to the illegal loggers without an investment.
But it's not sustainable.
But it is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. So that is the unfortunate thing. It's not sustainable, but it is also against the law. It is illegal.
Mr. Mugyenyi, let's talk about refugees. West Nile hosts one of the largest refugee populations on the African continent. To what extent are refugees degrading our forests?
I don't have the percentage, but I can comfortably say to a larger extent. Because there are a number of things that happen when refugees, come in. For example, when you look at the reserves near the refugee camps, that is the source of poles. That is the source of building materials, but it is also the source of the charcoal that is used. Even when refugees do not enter directly to do charcoal burning, but their presence increases the need for charcoal, and therefore the illegal loggers now find a quick avenue of earning some money. But it's also true that there are some refugees that are involved in illegal exploitation of the forest resources. So it adds pressure. Refugees add pressure on these forest resources because they are already being degraded as a result of a number of reasons. Now the refugees increase the pressure that already exists.
Karamoja's challenges appear different from West Nile's. What are the key drivers of degradation there?
The key drivers, first of all, is the what I can call the environment, because Karamoja is a little bit unique. The weather patterns or the climate of Karamoja is a little bit unique, and the climate itself poses a very big challenge. Karamoja has more prolonged dry spells, or it experiences prolonged dry spells than any other part of the country. So when it is a dry spell, they are pastoralists, the cattle, the herds, the sheep, they all converge on the wetlands and some of the protected areas as the last resort. So that itself is a challenge and causes some degradation. But two, you also have communities, what we call the indigenous communities in Karamoja, that have lived in these forest reserves. You remember, for example, like the Ik. So while we did the gazettement of these reserves, we did not make sufficient provisions for the communities that were already living in these forest reserves. So we have a community that lives next or within the forest reserve, and their rights have not been clearly defined. So they are cultivating, they are in there, they are being told they are occupying the forest illegally, but so that issue has never been resolved. It is also unique at Karamoja. It is not happening in West Nile. So you have communities that are living within the forest reserves whose rights have not been clearly defined. And that itself leads to encroachment. And remember, they are producing more human beings, and therefore the population is also increasing, and the pressure on the reserve is also increasing.
You see here, you're talking of climate change and less of poverty. Yes, yet poverty is a key issue in Karamoja. How much of what you're seeing in Karamoja is a climate change issue, and how much is a poverty issue?
It is a combination of both factors. Although I know that many people think that the degradation is a result of poverty. But when you look at the biggest degraders are not poor people. Even if you moved out of, for example, you go to areas where there is mining. The companies that are there that are doing the mining are not necessarily poor people. Yes, so poverty contributes to degradation, but it is not the sole driver of degradation.
The Karamoja story and the Karamojong story has been here for years, for decades, and we still not find a lasting solution. What lessons should the rest of Uganda learn from Karamoja's experience?
One, that the fast-changing climatic conditions of Karamoja can easily affect other parts of the country. Because we've seen Karamoja for a very long time as a unique area where they face prolonged droughts. And it was like, this is unique to Karamoja. But now, because the degradation is happening in many other places, we've started experiencing those prolonged dry spells in other many parts of the country. So what we need to learn is that environmental degradation or degradation of the forest resources is going to affect other areas in as much as they have affected Karamoja. And therefore we need to start taking measures to conserve these resources before we get into the same situation like Karamoja is in.
Uganda has numerous forest policies, laws, strategies, and commitments. Is the problem really a lack of policy or a lack of implementation?
The biggest challenge that we have in Uganda now is not about the policy, is not about the law. I think we have adequate policies, adequate laws, and guidelines. The challenge is implementation of these laws and guidelines.
Are we winning or losing the fight against degradation?
We are making some little progress. If that progress is sustained, we can win. But what we are making is little progress.
If government adopted any or only 3 recommendations from your policy briefs tomorrow, what would have the biggest impact?
The area where we may witness quick wins. One is increasing the participation of citizens in conservation. Increase the benefits that come to communities, come to citizens as a result, because there you are creating an incentive for citizens to do the conservation. Because if citizens, for example, do not address the issues of, for example, charcoal, by having woodlots, by having, but also by participating and complementing efforts of government. It is going to be very difficult to win this battle.
The scale of deforestation is not just amazing, but also overwhelming. If current trends continue for the next 5 or 10 years, what could Uganda's forests look like?
Business as usual. In the next 2 decades, half of the forest estate will be gone.
Those have been insights of Onesmus Mugyenyi, Deputy Executive Director, ACODE, unpacking the realities behind forest governance, climate justice, refugee pressures, and environmental accountability in West Nile and Karamoja. As Uganda confronts growing environmental pressures and increasing demand for natural resources, the challenge will be finding solutions that are both socially just and ecologically sustainable. Thank you for joining us once again. My name is Joshua Kagoro.